All right, everyone, welcome to a segment that I'm going to try maybe for a couple of rounds. If we like it, then we'll keep it. If we don't, we'll throw it out. So, for some background, this is Lindsey H. She is coming off of two in-person semifinals where she qualified for Legends, qualified for Magic City Games, had some solid showings at both of them. We had some noticings around what was happening with her results on the leaderboard, and now we're kind of getting into the point of off-season training where we're actually going into some strength progressions, going into a lot of the priorities that she had. We kind of gave her a 2-week rebuild back into training where we did a lot of unilateral work, a lot of low intensity work. We're not really trying to do anything crazy during that phase as much as we were just getting her back feeling good. And now that we have gone through those 2 weeks, we're going to start developing our progressions. So, one of the things, or we identified a number of things. One of the things that we identified was that we just need to get stronger. So for her in particular, a lot of absolute strength progression just needs to happen. So developing a 1RM deadlift, a 1RM squat, strict press, etc. And then we developed or understood that the rest of the women on the leaderboard who were around in these competitions tended to be anywhere from 10 to 15 or 20 pounds heavier. I don't know that she is the type of athlete that will ever be at a very high BMI relative to the rest of her competitors, but we do think it's important to attempt to put on some muscle mass in this off season. And so we also have a nutrition coach on board to facilitate that happening. And then one of our other priorities, just from a pure noticing standpoint when we were at Magic City, is that we need to get a little bit faster at moving the barbell and just moving in general. So she's a phenomenal open quarterfinal athlete. Obviously did really well at semifinals as well. But one of the issues when you get into these semifinal events is that people race so fast with their movement speed, and we just weren't prepared to absorb that type of pace in the competition. And when we had that noticing, we realized that we need to do something about that and give her the ability to race and express the capacity that she does have. So starting off, we're just going to give her a general warm-up. A couple of just general notes. We're dealing with a little bit of knee tightness. So you notice there's a lot of hip mobility work, hip rotation work. We're just kind of getting everything moving, getting the knee through a good range of motion with those natural knee extensions, starting her off with the foam roller hack squat, just trying to get the knee to open up and feel confident in that position. Then this is a little routine that we had kind of developed over the course of the last 6 months or so that just has her knees feeling good when she does do squat workouts. So banded terminal knee extensions plus the rear foot elevated split squats. When we were at Magic City, one of the things that we learned was that the distal hamstring is a little bit weak, so we're just priming with a little isometric single leg hamstring bridge, and then the Copenhagen plank hold. Again, we're just priming that adductor because this is another movement plane or pattern that she doesn't feel as strong in. So what we're trying to do is microdose those strength pieces before we get into our squatting mechanics. Once we get through the warm-up, get her body feeling prepared, I'm going to have her do some ballistics work. So generally speaking, anytime we have an athlete who's struggling with movement speed and racing, they need to learn how to create force faster. In my opinion, when we're doing that, the best way to do it is sprints and jumps. But because of that tight knee, I don't want her sprinting and I don't want her jumping just yet. We'll come back to the jumping aspect of that and the bounding aspect later on. as we walk through this day, but I want her to be as close to that pure speed spectrum as we can be. And so this is what we're doing, is some med ball throws. There's nothing crazy going on here. The idea is that these are max intent throws. So we're not just going through the motions. We're trying to create as much force on each of these as possible. And that's going to start to translate to the barbell, and then to our lighter movements with external load, which tends to be a little bit more of the types of movements that she struggles with racing, more so than body weight, although there are some body weight considerations that we want to work on with speed as well. Given that this is week 1, the back squat progression, we are certainly not testing. This is going to be a relatively moderate, like challenging session. It's going to feel more challenging than it's going to look for her because she hasn't gotten under a barbell with any significant load since Magic City. So we're giving the range of 70 to 75%. I'm probably going to get feedback that it was an 8 out of 10 hard, but the video is probably going to look like maybe not quite that challenging. That's just natural in the early phases of reacclimating to strength work. So we'll probably do this, do a small jump from there, and then get her into that 80+% range, which is where a lot of our strength development lives. After the squatting, we're going to move into our posterior chain hypertrophy work. So we've already kind of laid some foundations for some of this hypertrophy work, which is why we're able to go into a superset with 4 sets and a decent number of contractions. What I want to do with this specifically is that I want her to develop her 1RM deadlift a little bit, but the deadlift is definitely taking a back seat to our squatting. So what we've got is 2 days in this cycle reserved for accessory deadlifts, I'll call it. This is going to be one of those days where we're able to get a little bit heavier loading, but we're not driving true top end deadlift strength. So what we're hoping is that the deadlift will go up with those 2 smaller exposures and then just develop squatting strength and developing general hypertrophy, and that will all culminate into the deadlift rising with everything else. So that's kind of where we're at. The idea here is that I want to cue her specifically to drive with the glutes. So we're trying to make sure that we're not getting too much into the low back on either of these movements, making sure that we're getting appropriate muscle fiber recruitment. Then we're getting into our conditioning. This is conditioning that I don't see a lot of CrossFitters doing in the space, and it's not going to feel that metabolically challenging. Certainly will get a little bit hard over time, but what we're doing is working on movement speed. So the bar facing burpee, this is a movement that anytime there's a movement speed, I think that most athletes who have movement speed issues need to work on the burpee. So we're doing 12 bar facing burpees at max effort. We're resting a full minute. So we should be pretty recovered and ready to get in and out of these overhead squats pretty quick. So in the quarterfinals workout, and then again in our workout at Magic City when we were doing Nancy, is that we ran into the squat speed issue. So the 2 women in the adjoining or the adjacent lanes were squatting about 3 reps for every 2 reps that she was squatting in that overhead squat. And we think that if we can get that on par, we're taking a middle of the pack finish and turning it into a top 5, top 7 finish. And then as we're able to get into a little bit more run training, we think we have a pretty high ceiling there. But it starts with closing the gap on moving in and out of squatting. And we noticed in the semi-Gwyn event, the barbell cycling through the hinge pattern as well. So those are 2 things, the power snatch and the overhead squat, that we're aiming to improve in the off season. And early on, we don't need to improve it under fatigue because we need to improve it in isolation before that happens. The rope climb is something that I wanted to keep inside of the training for a couple of reasons. One, there was a little bit of ground given up to rope climb speed when we were testing that workout, the tie down workout at Magic City. But we spent a lot of time developing her rope climb capacity and technique in the off season of last year. And I don't want that skill to walk backwards. So if it's not in this speed development day, I'm going to put it in another day. Make sure that there's always a retainer in to get somewhere between 8 and 12 reps per session. And some days will be a little bit more technical focused. Some days will be a little bit more speed focused. But it's in more of a like retention phase than it is in a true development phase. But if we're putting it in on these speed development days, then we have the opportunity to actively work on doing this movement fast. And I think that that's an important thing to practice doing these skills fast and then having another day where we're doing them a little bit more mindfully and intentionally, but they're going to be a lot slower as we start to break down the nuance of the foot lock, how to stand more aggressively, hopefully be able to release both hands at the same time and re-grab, and learning the sliding mechanics to continue to improve that. We talked a little bit about the knee issues. One of the things that we did a few months ago was having her consult with a PT. The PT identified that there was a little bit of atrophy in one of the quads compared to the other. So we're simply taking a unilateral accessory work, making it a little bit more quad biased by elevating that front foot, going through the split squat. We're going to really few months and really try to bias unilateral anterior leg strength work. So trying to make sure that this gets addressed over the first 2 to 3 months of the off season, and then we feel more confident in doing some of the bilateral accessory work that could potentially target a similar hypertrophy profile as far as muscle groups, but might be a little bit more potent from a nervous system standpoint. Finally, going into our calf raise. So this is a progression that I like to use for athletes who have a little bit of trouble with bounding at this moment in time, whether it's pain-based or they're not poppy enough to do the bounding that I'm hoping for. And what this does is the metronome calf raise at 120 beats per minute forces the athlete to really bounce on their Achilles and learn to be elastic, but it reduces the amount of force that happens because their feet never leave the ground. So they're not absorbing the force on every single rep. Once we get an athlete consistently over 60 reps per set, then I start to feel confident in having them go into bilateral bounding. I have some benchmarks for that. Once we get them past that bilateral bounding, then we can move into single leg bounding. But this is meant to be, or it serves two purposes for Lindsey. One is that we are working on her double under mechanics. So this is something that we definitely need to improve over time, is making sure that those double unders get ironed out. But also we wanted to get her running a little bit more this off season and into next year. And the bounding mechanics will translate very well to running. So this is kind of foundational work for both of those movements.